Please welcome Janne Matlary, professor at the Institute for Political Science at the University in Oslo and also at the Norwegian Defense University College. You will lead this panel through a debate. I thought it was overkill when we had 6 panelists, but it's been fascinating to listen to how differently we see the Ukraine war and how we draw the consequences from it. Please, Janne.
Yes, François, please.
And François.
Thank you so much. And this is almost like a meeting in NATO, G7, or...
Should we be standing together?
Yes, this is what I hope. This is what I hope will be the outcome of the debate. There will be a renewed French-British relationship. But before we get to the conclusion, we will have some debating. Now, I think, Rob, you wrote in a chapter, in a book that we edited together on military strategy, you wrote a chapter on how states now cooperate. Yes, they cooperate, but they also compete. That's the second C. The third C is confrontation. The fourth one is coercion. The fifth one is conflict. So the 5 C's, that's the guiding star to international diplomacy in this age of great power, rivalry, bipolarism, and so on. And this means that strategic culture, strategic and military ability matter much more, relatively speaking, than for at least the last 30 years to the Europeans. And this is, I think, an entirely new experience for many European politicians who had buried military force as the ultima ratio regum. And now here we are, one traditional invasion, war of aggression in the midst of Europe, and this new reality with China, Russia, and other countries. So let me put to you this scenario. Some weeks ago, the normal reaction, I think, in Europe would have been that a war in Ukraine, it's not our war. They're not in NATO, they are not integrated in European structures. It's none of our concern, really. We will help them, but it's not our war. And then now, some weeks down the line, it is our war. It's a war that's going to be won, say the Americans, with their allies. And indeed, military force has become the only relevant tool for the time being. That is, we're going to have the outcome politically decided by the relative military power in the field. So my question to the 3 great powers here along the table, German money, Großmacht Deutschland, French and British strategic tradition and some money, and a lot of military ability and will to fight. The 3 of you, can you envision yourselves as being the new troika in NATO, that there will be NATO leadership where French-British leadership is restored with a renewed German strategic culture, perhaps? Can you envision that NATO now becomes the most important organization and the strategic autonomy, EU, and so on, is then receding into relative unimportance? Maybe François will say something about that first.
In English, there's an excellent expression, which is horses for courses, which means that you use the best tool available to achieve a given end. And it also means that you have to be pragmatic about it, even if the word pragmatism is actually very much a Latin word these days rather than an English word. What are the horses and what are the courses? It's fairly obvious that you cannot have a worldwide Western set of sanctions without the Asian allies. So what are you going to use? You are going to use the G7, which is what we've done. Mm-hmm. You are going to use the mini-lats and the bilats that many of us have with the countries of the Indo-Pacific. Britain, France have their network of strategic partners and dialogues in the region. It would maybe be a good thing if other European countries did so as well. The most important troika, but also the least visible one, has been the G3, which is Washington, London, and Paris, because of the nuclear dimension of this crisis. We don't usually talk very much about the nuclear dimension of this crisis, and the G3 have tended to take the view that it's maybe not a great idea to communicate very much about this, certainly at this stage. But it has been a constant concern. You will have seen how President Biden has been very sensitive to the issue of escalation control and deterrence, possibly sometimes to the point of overdoing it. But we have all been having these debates, and the only thing that I can tell you is that, yes, this is central, and it's very important. The G3 within NATO as a military coordination tool, I don't see it. I mean, I don't actually see it functioning. I see NATO functioning. I see the EU functioning. I see the traditional dyads or multilats functioning. The French-German hasn't been as effective as it has been because we've been in elections, and the Germans have been putting together their very young government. But these things remain. Well, Visegrad 4 I will not expatiate on because I don't know how many there are now in Visegrad. I just came back from Warsaw, and they didn't seem to like very much my questions about Hungary. My short answer is, given the nature of the courses that we have today, the particular horse that you mentioned is for the time being still very much in the stable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, luckily so. Rob, would you like to say something about...
I'll go after my German colleague.
Yeah, Germany first, please.
Okay. No, I think I very much agree with what François Heisbourg says here about the different formats having different purposes. And it is clear that for Germany, the two most important partners are the United States and France. And the two most important organizations are the EU and NATO. And in addition comes all different formats, and globally the G7, the G20 actually is also important, which might cause very new possibilities to engage with the outside world, but also dilemmas because Putin might be invited to sit at the table, and you will need to make a decision whether to participate or not. But these are the different formats, and then there are bilateral and trilateral formats where the E3 France, Britain, and Germany traditionally also go together when things need to get done on certain issues. I don't see, frankly, anything in NATO in particular changing, other than a very interesting statement from Olaf Scholz at his press conference in NATO, that when he said, listen, one thing we are doing now, we are strengthening territorial defense, and in the future it's only us and the United States who can guarantee territorial defense in Europe. I mean, this is kind of a statement that has been completely under the radar, but this shows an understanding that we have certain duties. We are aligned with the US. We're doing very much what they expect from us, or trying to do this, and then always, as I said in my talk, balance this with never upset the French too much, never go too much towards the US, and make them questioning our dedication towards joint European projects, including the project of developing the EU.
Thank you. And Britain?
Well, am I speaking for Britain as well now? Gosh, I feel a great deal of responsibility. There's obviously two ways to look at this, and my colleagues are absolutely right, that on the hard power side of things, NATO, defensive alliance, massive amounts of hard power, we sometimes forget, that actually there are 7 land corps of land power in NATO, an air force that dwarfs the size of the entirety of the Russian Air Force, and fleets that, again, dwarf whatever Russia could put to sea. I mean, this is a substantial hard power military alliance. Whether we use it effectively or not is a different question, and potentially that's why two nations can get together and say, well, territorial defence is down to us. I happen to think they're wrong. I think, if you look at territorial defence in Poland, it's absolutely brilliant.
Or in Finland, for that matter.
Well, I was going to add Finland to our list now that we can include on this. But look at Romania. Romania's just stood up a new core headquarters. I had the great privilege going along to talk to their teams. In terms of hard power, there is a huge amount on offer, and Britain's contribution will be in the future primarily maritime and air, but nevertheless it's still got a land contribution at the moment. And when it comes to those seas, we think about territorial defence, but let's not forget, the Arctic and High North, Baltic and Mediterranean are part of the package that contains Russia within its limits of its own borders. Now then, we have to consider the rest of the world. And I think the point that I think I would bring in and agree with François is that the soft power element is often misunderstood as simply, values and virtues. Economically, the leverage that Europe can bring to bear is astonishing. And with our American allies and Canadians, and then around the rest of the world, absolutely can't be beaten. What I would say, though, is we need to stop thinking, even though we are a defensive alliance, only in terms of defensiveness. We've got to get our defensive crouch and start to look at the critical vulnerabilities of Russia and actually start to intelligently use the powers that we possess. And that isn't just military power and deployments or nuclear. It's intelligently use the power we have to dislocate the Russian state and make them compliant to our will, as some dead Prussian officer once wrote.
Yes, it does seem now that, in a way, we finally have this natural division of labour then. EU, sanctions, economic policy, diplomacy, NATO, hard power, military power. And this has not been so obviously logical before, although one has realized that would be the only solution in a way to this competition in Brussels. And now we're going to have 2 new EU members in NATO. For Norwegians, this is a bit disconcerting, perhaps, because we are outside. There is no Norwegian speaker on this panel. Perhaps we should have one who said, yes, we are the experienced NATO member. We are, however, not in the EU yet, but once we join the EU, we will certainly be the Nordic leader of you all in NATO. I'm certainly not going to say that, of course, but I expect the Swedes will vie for that position, given their historical great power status. But seriously, it would be interesting to think along these lines, a Nordic bloc in NATO, maybe a Nordic bloc or a Nordic cooperation in the EU, certainly. We have a job to do there, as from Norway's side. But on the NATO side, now we see tremendous possibilities, as Mika was alluding to, and you as well, Anna. I would like to hear, have you had time to give any thought to how the deterrence posture might look in the Baltic Sea? I think for President Putin, there is a sort of nightmare come through here, because NATO is certainly surrounding Russia in the Baltic Sea, Kaliningrad. However, Russia has acquired basic influence, major influence in Belarus, as was also mentioned. Have you given any thought to how the Baltics and the Finns can cooperate, the Swedes? I expect Norway will be very much the Atlantic power in the north, and the 2 of you will be very active in the Baltic region. Perhaps Anna, ladies first.
Yes, well, thank you. Yes, I've been given it a lot of thought, actually, because I think Belarus is an important point. So
yeah.
when we look at Russia now, we have to think of Belarus as well in that context. And I think, given the small distances we have here, the interdependence of our security, we should think of this as extending or building ourselves an anti-access area denial bubble. That's my vision for this area. And it's not only the Baltic, but also up in the high north and down to the North Atlantic. Because and that would mean that basically having a signal that it's no idea to try and think about this area when it comes to defensive, offensive measures, because we all know that what we are reacting to is the possibility that Russia acts very fast in order to create facts on the ground and to take control over airspace or certain parts of a territory. And in order to prevent that, I think we need to have the deterrence by denial measurement and actually connect the dots that we have. We have missile defense, we have air defense, we have sensors and others, but we have not been able to take the full picture of that and do the planning for it, fill some of the gaps. But Sweden has, for instance, Patriots. They are not connected to any other systems. Poland, has it as well. What can we do there? We have a lot of the aircraft, the jet fighters, they do cross-country border training all over now, but, to extend that, do we have the logistics for that? So there are lots of things we can do to, I think, secure this area, because we cannot really do deterrence by punishment. That's extremely costly and extremely bloody, I think. So I would like to have that logic to it.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, that deterrence by denial is, of course, the preferred position for anyone, not deterrence by punishment. And the ACA2 problem has been exactly the deterrence by punishment model in the Baltics. Which is a model we have in the High North in Finnmark as well, but that's another story. Would you like to comment on this question, please?
Yes, it is a good question, and Anna mentioned key aspects of that. So what does it mean to fortify the Nordics in a larger sense of the region, the neighborhood? Well, the Finnish position has been a bit of a geopolitical bind always, from the Kola Peninsula to the Gulf of Finland to the Åland Islands. It has been read as a very vulnerable position to be in, and that has been highlighted in the Finnish careful, pragmatic foreign policy as well. But if you look the other way around, it is strategically extremely crucial part of the world missing piece of the puzzle. I didn't mention here the gates of St. Petersburg, but because there has to be a clear understanding that Russia has legitimate rights when it comes to right of passage through the Baltic Sea. Although it has been maneuvering lately through building, for example, infrastructure, gas pipelines, to a position that it can make security claims that are quite more extensive than they used to be. But Russia is in a spoke position, not a key hub on the Baltic Sea region. And if there's a defense planning based on the principles that Anna just mentioned, and Finland is, of course, supportive of that. We are a country, the Republic of Finland has always had it as a kind of a key value, a kind of extreme defensive position, not crossing the border. That has been one of the key points. But the Baltic Sea is a bit of a spoke for Russia. It's becoming difficult for them. They have a situation, what François said about having tools and for the right purpose. I don't think that what they did in Ukraine, they didn't use tools for the right purpose. If they wanted to change the European security order, look what they have caused. So they're using tools and they have mismanaged the situation quite badly so far. Let's see what the future brings. But then, of course, the Arctic, the far north, that has implications also when it comes to Finnish and Swedish joining NATO. And that is kind of the key element of it, not only the Baltic, but also the Arctic, the far north, how that is now better planned so that the status quo won't gradually, as it has been over the years when Russia has been rearming, it has been gradual, it hasn't been static, but dynamically changing towards the, for the Russian benefit in the region. So there is regional ramifications that go far beyond Swedish and Finnish NATO membership in here. The Gulf of Finland issue, it's a delicate thing, a narrow cape, quite a lot of world trade happens through it. And our Estonian friends, of course, would like to pay quite a lot of attention to that aspect in the defense planning. But it is an issue that remains up in the air, and we still need to be focused on that. What does it mean for the Gulf of Finland as a strategic bottleneck? And that has been one of the key sensitivities. Does it disturb rather than secure? I see now that it is a moment of security is needed, and the Gulf of Finland has to be included in the equation, and especially Estonia from the Finnish angle. From the Swedish angle, the solidarity, of course, extends further. But it is going to be a key to a puzzle that has been so far ignored.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting development we see with these two accessions, because it means that the British JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Brigade, the Northern Group, the diplomatic surrounding of this brigade, this cooperation led by Britain, which is partially NATO and was partially outside of NATO with Finnish and Swedish membership. This is one example of the dynamic of cooperation, partnerships that emerge because of strategic interests. And now Britain will have a leading role, in a way, as the only great power in the north in a northern European NATO. Whereas we see also that the deterrence effort of NATO will have to be very much also in Central Europe. So my question to Marton is really about defense cooperation among the Visegrad, which has been the weakest link, I think, in the otherwise quite extensive Visegrad cooperation. How do you see this developing, given that Hungary has had a much more cautious approach to Ukraine, as I think you put it, than has Poland?
Well, I think we should make a differentiation between talk and action here. Yeah. In the sense that if you look at the military modernization program of all the Central European countries, you would see that we are vying to meet the 2% pledge. All of us are having modernization programs to get rid of Soviet legacy equipment. And we have also increased planning and training cooperation on the ground. I think earlier this is Monday, so last week we hosted different elements from US Army Europe in Hungary for exercises. And we deployed to Romania, to other places. Hungary is going to be the lead nation of the Baltic Air Policing mission in Lithuania from August. So with the small quantities of equipment we have, we're trying to do whatever we can. Now, obviously, it's another question that whether this is enough to deter anybody in the neighborhood, and this is why we need the help of allies. But when it comes to military cooperation, I would like to once again underline that that has been very effective recently. And obviously, we have some issues to be overcome when it comes to administration and day-to-day training on the ground, and also that for how long we can host elements of allied nations, progress is being made. And if I do not only speak for Hungary, but for the region, for example, Poland has been very consistent on calling for a permanent US presence on its soil, whether it's Camp Trump or something else. The name might be not so important at the moment. When it comes to politics, I think that's a different question in a sense that that debate is not really taking place within NATO, but within the European Union. Mm-hmm. And once you open the Pandora's box of the European Union, you get issues which are closely interlinked. And everybody's trying to get better bargaining positions. Unfortunately for our Nordic friends, Turkey is doing the same in NATO at the moment. But in the European Union, you have lots of other strings attached. And because in the EU, as you highlighted very well, we're talking about economic sanctions, which are a bit more complicated than shoring up defense. Obviously, the debates are also more complicated. But I'm confident that there will be some compromise reached later this week at the European Council meeting, and that would resolve the situation for now. But even if there will be some compromise, I think these core insecurities of the Central European countries I've mentioned, that Slovakia is 100% dependent on Russian gas imports because they physically do not really have any other source. They're a landlocked country. They do not have an LNG port. And Poland has an LNG terminal in Świnoujście, but the interconnector is not ready yet. So if you cut them off the Russian supplies, it would be really hard for them to keep the country powered up. And before we move on, these issues will have to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, clearly, I think I heard that there were all in all 9,000 sanctions launched on due to the Ukraine crisis and war. And one of them was Swiss luxury watches that are not going to be sold to the oligarchs. So I wonder whether they survive that. But clearly, sanctions, it used to be, as we say in Norwegian, god latin, good Latin, meaning correct procedure, that you would analyze the effects on yourself before you launch the sanction on somebody else, and that you would target sanctions to regimes, especially in authoritarian states, and not launch them on the general public. So sort of the god latin, the good Latin prescriptions have not really been followed in this enormous sort of wave of sanctioning people, culture, almost anything Russian. Yes?
Just very quickly, I think when we started out sanctioning Russia, the principle was out there that the sanctions should hurt Russia more than they hurt us. We might have forgotten about that in the past couple of weeks.
Yes, please, François.
Yeah, we must not forget that the sanctions were initially designed not to cope with the war in Ukraine, but to prevent it. The objective when we started talking about sanctions in January was to convince Putin that it would not be a good idea to launch a war. Mm-hmm. So the principle that you invoke did not apply since the sanctions did not apply. And when, to the surprise, I think, of most European countries, it appeared that Putin actually did attack, we were then caught in our own trap. That is, we actually had to execute the sanctions if we were not to lose all credibility. If we had not overestimated the deterrent value of sanctions, and I think that's the mistake we did. We actually overestimated the deterrent the deterrent effect. We probably would have been more careful. You know, this brings us back to what you were saying about deterrence by denial. Deterrence by denial works because of the way it's built. You have to walk over us and fight us in order to get to your objective. And that is, I think, the basic lesson which all of our countries are now learning, and that is going to be forward defense, high upfront presence, and as far as Sweden and Finland are concerned, the ability to look very deep also into Russia. That is a dimension which one doesn't mention that often, but it's one of the things that Finland really brings to the table, because we were not, NATO was not plugged into the Finnish system until now.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's look a little ahead. And now the commitment to this, the commitment to winning this war has been clearly stated in Washington and in Kiev by the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, and of course by President Biden. One is going to help the Ukrainians win so that Russia can never attack really another country again, which seems an extremely, well, not only ambitious goal, but perhaps or not wise to say loudly. One could have chosen to supply Ukraine, Article 51 of the UN Pact, slowly watching them winning, but not proclaiming what winning means beforehand. And of course, it's another fact that the one who decides here, it's the US, then it's the UK, Poland, Baltic states follow. There's a firm group of these countries supporting the US line, and then there's not much of an option for another line, sort of strategic line on the part of, let's say, France or Italy and so on. So this is the course of events. Well, if we look ahead, winning militarily must mean that one wants to, of course, dictate the political outcome, or the military strength gives you the political outcome, which may mean when you break it, you own it, said Colin Powell. When Russia breaks it, we own it. So if this is the outcome, there's a clear victory in Ukraine militarily. Does that then mean that we will have not only the reconstruction cost, which will be immense, but of course one will want to include Ukraine quickly on a fast track into NATO and the EU and have American bases perhaps in Ukraine, secure this enormous country as part of the Western sphere, so to speak. So this is maybe provocative, but it's a Clausewitzian logic to it. You win militarily, then you have a political gain. So how does that look? I mean, somebody mentioned the West Balkans striving to fulfill the map criteria, Bosnia, for instance, and feeling then left behind. You also have fast track of your two countries, but you're quite ready for it. But this seems to me to be a major geopolitical shift, and after the fighting follows the politics. So I'm just offering this as a thought for comments from the panel.
May I kick off?
Yeah, or the British now.
Why don't you go ahead? Why don't you go ahead?
I was going to give way to you, but one of the problems we've got this term, victory, because for military personnel, it's quite straightforward what you have to achieve, and they're very well versed in getting there. The challenge is, at what point do you hand it back over to political leaders in order to make sense of whatever military outcome you've achieved? And one of the difficulties we have at the moment is that there are many routes in which the outcome of this conflict could go. If you look at the short term, I think we're all expecting some kind of stalemate. As the Russian army reaches a culminating point, I can see Ben here at the front, he's written extensively about this subject. The problem is that, and you made the point at the beginning, if we think longer term, it is possible to conceive of a Russian military recovery quite quickly if we are premature in reaching for some kind of political settlement. We go too soon for a political settlement. So one of the things that Putin may well consider as a perfectly viable option is to grind his army down, achieve as much territorial space acquisition as possible between now and the winter of 2022-23, and then go firm, as the military would say. Remain where you are. You're in possession of more territory than you had at the beginning in February of 2022. You could then conduct a desultory war, broken back war, where you use that time to recover militarily. You use higher oil and gas prices to reconstruct the Russian economy. And it's not difficult to imagine, therefore, a Russian military recovery, as well as presenting poor Ukraine with something of a stalemate. Now, of course, there are other options, I think, and one of the things that I think keeps me awake at night is the possibility that Russia might learn something from this disastrous and illegal and immoral war that it's launched, and decide to pause in the next few months, and then to coordinate its future diplomatic and military activity with China, knowing full well that the Western world will be very hard-pressed to manage two conflicts and an economic war with both Russia and with China. So I think the really big challenge is not the immediate next few months. The really big debate that we should be having, and I know we're going to have this debate hopefully tomorrow, is much more about what do we do between the 3-year point from now, in 2025, through to the end of the 10-year point, because that is going to be the really critical point for this arrangement.
Yeah.
François?
I'll give my take on
Yes.
I'll begin with Russia. Putin's biological clock may have more time on it than Biden's biological and political clock, but still, he is a man of 70. He isn't going to be around forever. In other words, the Russia we're going to have to deal with in 10 years is probably not going to be the Russia of Putin.
Yes.
That we obviously have to bear in mind, and nobody has or can have any idea of what that Russia will look like. Will it look like Turkey's, like Kemal Atatürk's non-revisionist Turkey? That worked for 80 years, by the way. That was pretty good. Or will it look like one of the other failing empires after the First World War? Will it go into pieces like the Austro-Hungarian Empire? Will it have another authoritarian, totalitarian burst like Germany? Will it have an ideological transformation like the Russian Empire in 1917? Nobody knows. So to make brave statements like we will never do this, or we will never do that, or we will, it doesn't serve any purpose. You don't say we'll keep the sanctions forever. That's not, you can't say that. What you need to do is to beat Putin. And,
exactly.
and if there is a diplomatic outcome, to see what would be a manageable diplomatic outcome with Putin. What happens after, we don't know. On Ukraine, Ukraine has war aims which are very clear, very simple, dictated by the simplicity and the brutality of what has been done to it. And that is, as the ambassador put it this morning, the recovery of its territorial integrity, and its full sovereignty, including, of course, the right of the choice of its alliances and the groupings to which it wants to belong. If we find that Russia has been comprehensively beaten, and if Ukraine is in NATO and moving towards the European Union, which is always slower in any case, well, then would sanctions serve a purpose? I don't know, but it's not prima facie. That is also one way we'd have to find out. As for what will happen in the near future, for me, the basic scenario scenarios. One is that it's indeed attrition, what you indicated, stalemate, and Putin eventually accepting the Lloyd Austin, Konrad Scholz immediate ceasefire proposal, which would, of course, be enormously advantageous to Russia. Why the American SecDef made that suggestion, I still don't understand. He made it to Shoigu. He didn't get any. He got a lot less flack than Scholz. I mean, it's always more fun to beat up on the Germans than to beat up on the Americans. Clearly, at least in certain parts of the world. The other scenario is much more dynamic. One, and that is a counteroffensive by Ukraine against Kherson. There are signs that that may be in the initial stages of being set up. And the other one will be driven by a combination of countries from the West and possibly from the Third World. And that is, of course, the blockade issue. That will be the big topic of the next summer, and it will make the discussions on the diplomacy of the war enormously more interesting and complicated than they are now, which is another way of saying, here again, don't take definitive positions on the basis of what you know now, when you can assume that in 4 months' time you're going to know some very different things.
Exactly. All the insecurity and the risk. This is Clausewitz, of course, classic, that unintended consequences and many difficult intended ones. Comments on this big question? Shall we just take the four of you? We have then 3 minutes each. Go ahead, please.
Just on the scenario you posed, I think it's a very good point. I think there is no consensus, what I hear, about the future of Ukraine or Georgia or you know, Bosnia-Herzegovina on EU membership or NATO membership ahead. So it's a completely confused discussion, and we need to do that better, I think, because we will have that dilemma to deal with. And I think one lesson learned that I'm fascinated about is that when this war started, I think it was clear. I mean, why has Sweden and Finland a fast track to NATO? Yes, of course, we are interoperable and trustworthy, we're EU members and all of that. But also, it's a win-win for the alliance, as we heard here, you know. If Sweden and Finland join, it will facilitate meeting the Russian threat. So how do we view Ukraine in that regard, or Georgia? So it has not been viewed in the same way, to be honest, because Georgia and Ukraine share that threat with us, but it has not been considered as vital for the alliance to have them with us. Has that changed now, is my question, with Ukraine? We say that Ukraine is fighting the war for us now, as a European state. But will that hold? I'm not sure. What about Georgia? What is the analysis? I don't think we are ready with this, and the Western Balkan as well. But if we don't take that analysis, someone else will come and fill that space, that is for sure. It can't be, it's also a big risk for us not having settled whether these are part of Europe on what conditions or not. So that is why we have to do the homework better.
Yeah. The strategic ambiguity advantage versus the advantage of strategic leadership and the risk inherent. Yes, Germany, you're taking the risk.
Yeah, there are these debates, discussions in Germany about the end state, the war strategy. Should we support the view of the Ukraine winning, or should we be more careful? And everybody's looking at the Chancellor because he's not clear about it. Everybody thinks, and thus suggesting that he might, together with Macron and Draghi, perhaps advocate for a ceasefire, thus prioritizing ending the war to making Ukraine win. I think that there are two main features that are dictating what Germany does now. The one is the dynamic that has forced it to make all these changes to its policy. It can't do anything else than support Ukraine now. And as long as this war is going on, like it's going on now, Germany can't do anything else. It might do it slowly and in a very German way, but it has no choice but to support it. And then there's the longer view. And I think much of the German ambiguity comes from that we can see this now. We have to relate to certain principles, EU membership track. This is taking time. We need this time. We need not only be show solidarity to those countries that are in line first, but we also want to properly check candidates before joining. So this is a long process. We can't agree just under this pressure now to a dynamic. And this might be typical Germany, but this kind of reflects some of the, as Germans like to say, responsibility they are feeling, not only for what they're doing, but how they represent Europe as large. But I think when you read the statements, there's a clear commitment to supporting Ukraine now. There's a clear commitment not to accept peace that is dictated to Ukraine. So you have all these statements, and they're there, very difficult to go behind them. So there's this short view and long view, and on the long view, you won't get any clear statements, I'm afraid, from a German side.
Yeah, that's it's also understandable. And Hungary would like a large buffer country in the EU and NATO to your east, wouldn't you?
Well, two things. First of all, we have, on the one hand, we have President Biden saying that, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. But the last time the United States had to manage the disintegration of the Soviet Union, we ended up with the Chicken Kiev speech. Yeah. So might be a change in narrative, but substantially, I do not think that the United States is interested in the disintegration of Russia because of dozens of reasons, and we should be frank about that. The second is about the reconstruction of Ukraine. I mean, I personally never had any illusions that who will have to bankroll this, that will be the European Union, possibly taking out a loan to be able to finance this. But I think this is essential, not the loan part, but the reconstruction part. Because on the one hand, we need a stable, economically prosperous Ukraine, because otherwise we will have a mess on our doorstep. It is the European Union's interest to keep this country up and running, put them once again together. And ironically, maybe the war will help to dismantle those kind of oligarchic structures which have been hampering the modernization of the Ukrainian economy in the last 30 years. And the other is that if we think about the reconstruction, it's, to be very honest with ourselves, it's also a business opportunity for European companies. There will be lots of roads, rails, bridges, whatever to be built. There will be an undercapitalized market where European companies will have business opportunities. So it's not like, we're just going to throw a lot of money at Ukraine for charity. There's also a lot we can learn from this. And to be very honest, once again, coming from Hungary, this is what happened to us after the regime changed 30 years ago. We had lack of capital, so Western companies who had technology, capital, had lots of market access in the region. If you look at the retail chains in Central Europe, most of them are owned by German and French multinational companies. So there's a cost, obviously, but there's a lot of money that we can make out of this as well.
Maybe a win-win. And you've Finland's view of this?
My own vision, François was quite right that there's quite a lot of leeway and contingency when it comes to predicting the future, and there are a couple of key ingredients that we have to consider. The Russian case, what are going to be the dynamics of it, the democratic momentum, and how to manage that, how long-lasting that is going to be. And then of course, the history doesn't stop here in this position of two sides fighting for instrumental or ontological reasons. The resource scarcity, the Black Sea blockade is a good example of economic statecraft that is not so much perhaps meant to suffocate Ukraine, but to turn the world markets upside down. So hampering things, spoiling things for the West, affecting also the democratic solidarity when the prices go up, inflation rises, interest rates go up, then the voters suddenly do not perhaps care so much about external events. They vote for domestic reasons, and we don't know how predictable that is going to be. Reference to American elections was made in here. But for Russia, I think the clear answer is that usually when autocratic regimes cannot anymore externalize their internal tensions in effective outside campaigns, there's going to be consequences at home.
Yeah.
There's going to be somebody close to Putin who's going to say that I would have done this better. And if there were only 2 to 3 people, 3 to 4 people deciding to launch the war, then there's going to be people close to that circle, but who are very sure that they would have done it more effectively. And that leads into internal cleansing instead of cleansing of Ukraine through this brutal campaign. And what does that mean when the reputation of Stalin has been restored again in Russia? So I see bleak, unpredictable scenarios for Russia, but I'm a little bit biased towards regressive, bleak scenarios in the future, so take that into account.
Thank you very much. This was perfect timing. We are now 3 seconds of 4 o'clock. 1 second, yes. No overtime. And a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much indeed. This is like the Olympics. That's 0-0, no overtime. No overweight, perhaps as well.
Thank you very much to Janne and the whole panel. This has been a great discussion.